Imagine it's the year 1070, and the Seljuk Turks are knocking on the Eastern Roman Empire's door. They're not just dropping by for a chat, they're here to stay. Fast forward to 1073, and along comes Atsiz ibn Uwaq, a Seljuk commander with a serious agenda. He sweeps into Jerusalem like he owns the place, snatching it from the Egyptian Fatimids. Now, under the Fatimids, Christian pilgrimages to Jerusalem were like a road trip with a few toll booths. Sure, you might have to pay a little extra, but you get there safely enough. But when the Seljuks took over, it was more like driving through a war zone, because he focused on military expansion and control, often disrupted the peace and security, and made pilgrimages treacherous. The blood of the innocent flowed through the streets in 1077, when Atsiz mercilessly crushed a rebellion, leaving a scar on the sacred land. The holy city, once a beacon for pilgrims, became a place of fear and sorrow. By 1095, the Byzantine Empire was in a real bind. They needed help and fast, so they sent envoys to Pope Urban II at the Council of Piacenza, pleading for assistance. They painted a bleak picture of their crumbling empire and the relentless Seljuk threat looming over them. Pope Urban II, deeply moved by their plight, decided to take action. When he stood before the crowd at the Council of Clermont in November 1095, was like a medieval TED Talk, but with way more at stake. With a voice burning with righteous fervor, Pope Urban II delivered a sermon that would resonate through the ages. His passionate call to arms urged every faithful Christian to embark on a divine mission to reclaim the Holy Land and restore the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem to Christian hands. This was not just a battle, 'twas a sacred duty, a holy war for God's glory. The promise of eternal salvation for those who took up the cross and fought for the Holy Land ignited the hearts of thousands, setting the stage for the epic and tumultuous journey of the Crusades. And that was the moment when the First Crusade began. The People's Crusade, led by Peter the Hermit, was the first to set out, but was decimated by the Seljuks at the Battle of Civitate in 1096. Following this, the Prince's Crusade, comprised of high nobility and their followers, embarked in late 1096. Assembling a massive force of up to 100,000, it achieved significant victories, such as the Siege of Nicaea, an initial Crusader victory, and the Battle of Dorylaeum. After a challenging march through Anatolia, they captured Antioch in June 1098. After the dramatic capture of Antioch, you'd think the Crusaders would be celebrating, right? Well, not quite. Instead of marching on to glory, they found themselves stuck in a pretty rough spot. Sure, taking the city helped with their supply issues for a hot minute, but their victory quickly turned into a serious headache. The summer sun was brutal, baking the land south of Antioch into a dusty, barren wasteland, and let's face it, trekking through that kind of heat is no picnic, especially if you're one of the poorer Crusaders, barely scraping by. But wait, there's more. Just when things couldn't get worse, a deadly plague decided to crash the Antioch party. Striking down the Crusader leaders with ruthless efficiency, the plague ravaged Count Raymond, diminishing his strength and resolve. More devastating was the death of the papal legate Adhemar of Lipui, whose calm and wise presence had been the glue holding together the fragile coalition of Frankish lords. Amid the relentless infighting between Raymond and Bohemond, bitter disputes over the city's future non-stop happened. Bohemond, now entrenched within the citadel's impregnable walls, declared himself the Prince of Antioch, sealing off his ambitions from the broader crusade. His refusal to further engage in the campaign became a contentious issue. Raymond of Toulouse, desperate to maintain the crusade's momentum, repeatedly implored Bohemond to abandon his personal quest and focus on the collective goal. He even reached out to Emperor Alexios, urging him to join forces and reclaim the city. But despite his tireless efforts, these appeals fell on deaf ears. The crusade, now mired in stagnation, saw the only significant progress in December with the capture of the nearby city of Merit, a dark chapter in the First Crusade. For 2 relentless weeks, the Crusaders pounded the city of Merit with everything they had, On December 11th, the city walls finally gave in, and what followed was nothing short of chaos. As soon as they broke through, the Crusaders stormed in like a pack of starving wolves. And to be honest, they kind of were starving, that is. Desperation, hunger, and a bit of that intense medieval zeal took over, and things got really ugly really fast. The Crusaders didn't hold back. They went on a rampage, and the city turned into a nightmare. The streets were literally flowing with blood as the Crusaders cut down anyone in their path. Men, women, children, it didn't matter. They were on a mission, and they looted everything they could get their hands on. The soundscape of Merit was filled with a terrifying mix of screams, the clang of weapons, and the Crusaders moving forward with terrifying determination. But the true horror lay in what came next. As supplies dwindled and starvation set in, reports from both Christian and Muslim chroniclers tell of a descent into the macabre. Some Crusaders, driven to the brink of madness by their hunger, resorted to cannibalism. They fed on the bodies of their fallen enemies, a grotesque act that shocked even the hardened warriors of the crusade. The accounts speak of flesh being cut from the dead and cooked, a ghastly feast born out of sheer desperation. The delay was excruciating, causing growing unrest among the lower-ranked knights and officers. Their frustration reached a boiling point, and by the end of the year, the minor knights and infantry were threatening to march to Jerusalem without their leaders. Eventually, on January 13, 1099, Raymond began the march south down the coast of the Mediterranean, barefoot. And dressed as a pilgrim, followed by Robert and Tancred and their respective armies. As Raymond's army advanced, an unexpected advantage fell into their laps. Stories of the gruesome events at the Siege of Antioch, including shocking reports of cannibalism, had spread rapidly across the region. Terrified of facing similar horrors, local emirs began sending envoys, gifts, and offers of surrender, desperately seeking to avoid a similar fate. On their way, the Crusaders besieged Arca but failed to capture it and abandoned the siege on May 13th. In a desperate effort to hinder the impending storm, the Fatimids reached out with an olive branch to the Crusaders. They offered a tantalizing promise: freedom of passage for pilgrims yearning to tread upon the sacred soil of the Holy Land. On one condition, that the Crusaders halt their relentless advance and spare their lands. But the Crusaders rejected the offer outright, their eyes fixed on the prize of Jerusalem itself. After 5 grueling months of relatively smooth travel through Palestine, the European Crusaders arrived at the port city of Jaffa, their hopes high as they prepared to advance towards Jerusalem. Yet, as they began their inland march, dark tidings struck. An elite Fatimid force of 400 Egyptian cavalrymen was assembling in Egypt, poised to challenge them with unrivaled ferocity. The situation rapidly deteriorated as the Crusaders discovered that their path had been sabotaged. Wells that once provided crucial water had been poisoned or buried, and the surrounding trees, which could have offered refuge, were ruthlessly felled. The landscape turned into a harsh, barren wasteland, transforming their once promising route into a treacherous obstacle course. Amid this mounting adversity, Iftikhar ad-Dawla, the Fatimid governor of Jerusalem, took a draconian measure. Fearing betrayal and bolstering his defenses, he expelled all Eastern Christians from the city. This brutal action not only denied the Crusaders potential local support, but also further strained their already dwindling resources. A sense of uncertainty crept into the Crusader ranks. The scorching summer heat, the gathering enemy forces, and the hostile environment weighed heavily on their spirits. Yet, the sight of their ultimate goal fueled their determination. Nothing could deter them now. On June 7th, nearly 2 years after leaving Constantinople, the Prince's Crusade finally reached the holy city of Jerusalem and set up their camps around its formidable walls. Much like the siege of Antioch the previous year, Jerusalem was too vast to encircle completely. The ancient city stood like an impregnable fortress, its colossal walls stretching for 4 kilometers, a formidable barrier 3 meters thick and rising 15 meters into the sky. Guarding the city's fate were 5 massive gates, each flanked by imposing towers. The Crusaders divided their forces. Raymond established his camp on the southern section of the wall, while Godfrey and the Normans took position on the northern side. Despite the attrition and losses over the past 2 years, the crusading army still boasted around 1,300 knights and 12,000 infantry. A formidable force against even a well-defended fortress like Jerusalem. The Fatimid governor, Iftikhar ad-Dawla, had predicted their arrival for months and had made extensive preparations. The city was well supplied and heavily fortified, with a few hundred skilled light horsemen under his command to harass the besieging crusaders. The relentless desert sun bore down on the crusaders as they struggled with dwindling resources in the harsh terrain around Jerusalem. The Fatimid defenders, cunning and determined, had rendered local food and water sources unusable, forcing the exhausted crusaders to trek across vast distances in a desperate search for supplies. Each journey was fraught with peril. The fierce cavalry of Attila often emerged from the city's shadowed gates to harry the vulnerable foragers. Their attacks swift and merciless. The crusaders were caught in a desperate race against time. With each passing day, their supplies dwindled, and the fear of a Muslim relief force from Egypt loomed like a dark cloud over their heads. The pressure mounted as the defenders' countermeasures seemed to stretch the crusaders' endurance to its breaking point. By June 13th, the crusader leaders made a fateful decision. They would launch an assault on the city's formidable walls despite being woefully unprepared. Their only scaling ladder, a humble and rickety tool, was hardly enough to breach the well-defended walls of Jerusalem. The Crusaders' confidence, enhanced by their fervent belief in divine support, proved insufficient. The attack was a mistake from the start, and the defenders, with resolute determination, repelled the assault with relative ease. The once hopeful Crusaders now faced the grim reality of their situation. Their ranks thinned by the slaughter that ensued. In the midst of this despair, a glimmer of hope, or perhaps a cruel twist of fate, emerged from an unexpected source. One of Raymond's priests claimed to have received a vision from the late Bishop Adhemar, revered figure whose death had cast a shadow over the Crusaders' morale. In this vision, Bishop Adhemar chastised the leaders for their infighting and offered a prophetic solution to their woes. The vision instructed the Crusaders to undertake a rigorous penance, a fast, a barefoot procession around the city walls, and a heartfelt appeal for divine intervention. The Crusaders, driven by their hope that this spiritual ritual might turn their fortunes, accepted the vision's demands with fervent resolve. They performed the penance with solemnity, their feet blistered and spirits strained as they circled the walls in a display of humility and supplication. It must have been a puzzling sight for the Muslim defenders. In the midst of the grueling siege, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. Genoese galleys, helmed by the intrepid merchant, cut through the waters of Jaffa's harbor, a mere 70 kilometers away. Their arrival was nothing short of a miracle, delivering vital supplies and skilled craftsmen at a time when the Crusaders were desperate for both. As the Fatimid fleet closed in, encircling the harbor and threatening the sailors, the ships were swiftly dismantled. The Crusaders, fervently thanking the heavens for this unexpected blessing, hastily converted the wood into 2 formidable siege towers, the finest siege equipment of the 11th century, in almost 3 weeks. A battering ram with an ironclad head, numerous scaling ladders, and a series of portable wattle screens. Now they were ready to attack. The Fatimids kept an eye on the preparations by the Franks, and set up their mangonels on the wall in the firing range. Once an assault began, these new engines of war were positioned strategically at the northern and southern walls of the city. By July 13th, a new assault was underway. Raymond, with fiery resolve, spearheaded the attack on the southern wall, while Godfrey and the Normans took on the northern defenses. A violent storm raged through the day, adding to the chaos of the battle. The storm seemed almost a reflection of the brutal conflict below, as both sides suffered heavy losses. Yet the walls of Jerusalem remained defiant. As night fell, Godfrey, ever the cunning strategist, made a daring decision. Under cover of darkness, he had the northern siege tower secretly dismantled and transported to the less fortified Flowers Gate. This audacious move was a desperate gamble to break through the city's defenses. The following day was a maelstrom of relentless brutality as the Crusaders hammered at the city walls without respite. In the blistering afternoon heat, the defenders struck back with ferocity. The Fatimids, in a desperate bid to stave off the invaders, succeeded in setting ablaze Raymond's towering siege engine, sending plumes of smoke into the sky and turning the tide of battle against the southern assault. With Raymond's forces reeling and the southern front crumbling, the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. Yet amid the chaos and desperation, Godfrey's resolve remained unshaken. Kay continued to lead his men, pressing his assault on the northern wall, determined to breach the city's defenses against all odds. As the moon cast a haunting glow over Jerusalem, the relentless Crusaders launched their final, desperate assault. After an exhausting day and night of unceasing battle, the city's defenses finally gave way. With a thunderous crash, the gate was breached and a torrent of Crusaders poured into the city, igniting fierce skirmishes in the narrow, winding streets and alleys. Raymond's troops, aided by the defenders of the southern wall, surged through the gates, opening the floodgates of chaos. In a matter of moments, the city's defenses crumbled under the sheer might of the Crusaders. The ensuing horror was unimaginable. The Crusaders, driven by a fevered mix of religious fervor and bloodlust, unleashed indiscriminate slaughter upon the Jewish and Muslim inhabitants. Princes turned a blind eye as their men descended into madness, looting and killing without restraint. Desperate for sanctuary, many citizens flocked to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, clinging to a fragile hope of safety under the watch of Tancred, Bohemon's brave nephew. But safety was an illusion. As Tancred battled in another part of the city, the bloodshed spilled into the mosque, transforming it from a haven into a scene of utter devastation. Among the chaos, the Fatimid governor, Iftikhar ad-Dawla, surrendered to Raymond. His small retinue was granted a rare reprieve and safe passage south. Yet, for most, there was no such mercy. The exact death toll remains unknown, with the figure of 70,000 given by the Muslim historian Ibn Laleh, considered to be a significant exaggeration. 40,000 is plausible, given the city's population had been swollen by refugees fleeing the advance of the crusading army. At the end of the fierce journey of the siege of Jerusalem in 1099, we do not stop at victories and defeats, but also pause to deeply reflect on the human and historical values that this event left behind. In the pain of those who fell, we find valuable lessons about perseverance, faith, and the cruelty of war. Regret remains not only in the loss of life, but also in the missed opportunities for peace. The historical turns that, had they taken differently, perhaps the world today would be very different. But it is those choices, whether right or wrong, that have shaped the path we walk today. In the spirit of gratitude to history, we need to continue to learn from these painful and tragic pages of history. History is not just stories of the past, but also a guiding light, a source of inspiration for those who love and respect truth and justice. When we share these stories with each other, we not only connect with those who have gone before us, but also with other history lovers. In that spirit, let's continue to keep the passion for history alive, so that these emotional and meaningful pages of history never fade from our minds.